there's no transition point. We're going to go straight into the sermon. So thank you guys for being here. Like I said, it's a little different of a Sunday. I'm not normally the singer, as you can tell. You're like, wow, that was such a shock. I thought that guy was like that. No, I tricked you. So, my name is Bert. I'm the pastor here. I normally just do the teaching, but we're in between worship leaders right now, and so we're praying that the Lord would send us a worship leader, or pray that one of you guys would be faithful. I'm tired of the sin, okay? I'm tired of the disobedience, okay? So, as your pastor. So, this is not my skill set, as you can see. From the South, and in the South, every young boy is given at some point a guitar and a golf bag full of golf clubs, and he knows how to use neither. It's crazy. They just sit in your garage until you die. So I used mine today for the first time. I can't wait to call my dad and tell him. But we are in the book of Luke, chapter 5. We're going to continue on in our series through the book of Luke. We are going through it piece by piece, understanding the gospel of Luke, who the person of Luke was, why he wrote his specific gospel, because the four gospels all have a different and a specific direction. They're all telling the story of Jesus. They're all telling the story of Jesus, but they are written for and geared in different directions for different groups of people. So the first one, Matthew, of course, we're going to talk about him in a couple of weeks, but Matthew is a disciple of Jesus who wrote his gospel so that the Jews would better understand that Jesus was the fulfillment of the Old Testament, that he was the Messiah, the prophesied Messiah. The book of Luke, which we're in, is a divine history. Luke is an historian and a doctor who writes down an orderly account for the Greeks. He wants the Greeks to be able to understand the gospel. He wants them to understand Jesus. And then we have John, which is amazing because John is special because it's written like a court case drama. John is making an argument for why you should follow Jesus, for why he is the Son of God. And he makes this very intentional, laid out argument for that case, which is powerful. But then Mark is great because Mark is like your redneck cousin. He's like, this happened, this dude happened, that guy died, this happened, it was there, we're done. He's in and out. It was written by Peter, technically, and Peter was an illiterate man, very blue collar, and he was and then this, and then this, and then this, the end. So if you like a simple, short read Mark. There you go. So, but we are in the book of Luke, and so we're going to be in Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 12. And what we're talking about today is two healings, two different miracles that Jesus does. And these miracles, do I need to turn this off maybe? I don't know. Or is it just me? Am I just hearing things? No. Oh, that's fine. Okay. I don't know if I'm losing it. All those machines attached to me. Whatever. Luke chapter 5, verse 12. Jesus has two different miracles that seem kind of random, but they're put together and they're there for a reason and for a purpose. And our sermon title today, if I had to give it a sermon title, would be The Broken Roof. Because the second miracle that we're going to get to is probably, personally for me, one of my favorite passages in the book of Luke. It's something that I've helped, it's just very motivating and encouraging to my heart. When I see the faith of the group of people that caused the broken roof, it really just speaks to me. And so personally, I'm a little biased because I like this. But we're going to start in verse 12. Verse 12 says this, that while Jesus was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell down onto his face and he begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. If you're highlighting or you have a pencil or whatever, I would circle that. I would underline it. He says, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. I will it be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged him to tell no one, but instead to go and show himself to the priest, to make an offering for your cleansing, as Moses has commanded, as a proof to the people. But now even more the report about Jesus went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to the desolated places for prayer. So what we have here is, and we've talked about this already, but Jesus heals a person with leprosy. Now leprosy is interesting because we healed that a long time ago. It actually wasn't as contagious as people thought it was back then. But 2,000 years ago, if you contracted leprosy, it was a death sentence, basically. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. You would eventually die. Your skin would rot off of your body, but it took years. They had no way of healing it. But then it was also just death to your community. They would exile you out of the town, and you would have to live in a leper colony away from everybody else. And then you and everybody else with leprosy would just rot to death together. And so if somebody contracted leprosy 2,000 years ago, it was a huge deal, huge problem. It was a skin disease, and technically there's like 70-something different variations of it. When the Bible talks about leprosy, it usually kind of talks about a handful of ones that are about the same, but they're linked to this. They're linked to, it would kick you out of the community, but it was linked to the fact that it wasn't like, okay, you're contagious, we need to keep you isolated to quarantine. It was, no, you now have become impure. Like you are now, something's wrong with you. And so because of that, I need you to be away from us because we don't want to catch what you have. Because in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, leprosy was linked to sin. It was linked to a consequence. So when a person was stricken with leprosy in the Hebrew Bible, it was usually, for the most part, due to the fact that they had committed some type of sin, and it was a divine punishment. And God said, it can be healed, it can go away, but it's a punishment for the consequences of the sinful choices you've made. Now, the sinful choices we make today sometimes have these types of consequences, not nearly as dire as being kicked out and made to live in a tent outside of your town. That'd be kind of wild. Like you kick you out of Needham and you're just living across the line in Dedham in a tent. That would be wild. But the leper colony of Needham, I don't know. But it was seen as so much more than just being like physically sick. If somebody saw you with leprosy, they would immediately go, you did something wrong. Like you broke a rule, you're a sinner, and because you're a sinner, you can't be around us because I don't want to catch what you have. I don't want the punishment of your sin to get contagious all over me. And so they would kick you out. And it was only could be removed by one way, one system. And they knew full and well that leprosy could only be healed from an act of God. That was the only way that when that showed up, it could go away. So when they saw contamination, when the world looked at you and saw contamination, Jesus looks at this man and sees restoration. What's powerful here is that this man, by law, a leper, was not allowed to walk up to people who didn't have leprosy. They could kill him immediately for that. And this man takes a risk. He literally risks his entire life. He says, I can either die by a death by 1,000 paper cuts over years and years and years. I can approach this man, break the law, and they'll execute me. He's like, I'm just going to risk it. I'm going to risk it and approach this man, Jesus, from what I've heard, what I've seen, and what I believe. And what's so powerful about these two miracles that we see in Luke chapter 5 is that they give us such a basic and clear understanding of what faith even looks like. Faith is when I don't have all of the answers and I still take a step. Like I don't see the full picture, but I still trust the painter. And so in this moment, this guy with leprosy approaches Jesus and says, Jesus, he goes, like I told you to underline, if you will it. He goes, you can do this. You have the ability. I trust that you can heal me. If you want to, so be it. You can make me clean. And that's a level of faith that when this kind of happens with Jesus, it's always like such like a mark of like pride for him. It's like always so happy because what he has is he sees somebody who trusts him. And that's the call that God has for each and every single one of us, is for us to look at God and go, yeah, I trust you. I choose your route. I choose your way. In fact, the first sin in the Garden of Eden was not eating fruit. Like, oh no, apples are bad, I guess. No. That wasn't the first sin. The first sin was when Eve and Adam, because Adam was there as well, said, I don't trust you, God. Like, I don't trust that you're good. I don't think that you're telling me the truth. I don't trust you. And so that's the restoration that God is trying to get every single one of us back to take that daily faithful step of saying, God, I know you can do this. If you will it, you can make me clean. That's a power and a level of faith that we don't see that much. Now, what's powerful here as well is that Jesus has healed and will continue to heal people through the gospel just by saying the word. In fact, he even does remote healings where there's a centurion staff comes to him and he's like, hey, so-and-so is sick at home. And Jesus just says the word and the person's healed from a distance. It's wild. Like he doesn't need to be near the person. He doesn't need to touch the person. All he has to do is say, you're healed. But in this situation, verse 13, Jesus does something very different. In fact, everybody around. So imagine in your head this picture. Jesus and his crew, it's just a few guys at this point. Not the whole 12 disciples haven't been called together. There's about 3 or 4. And they're walking. There's a crowd with Jesus because he's teaching as he's walking. And he's walking to the next city. And this leper comes running up to him. And in that moment, everybody else knew we got to scatter. Time to skedaddle. Like, so if somebody's running at you with that sickness, everybody else just would have taken off. Like John and Peter were there at this point. You know Peter just must have been booking it. Just like, oh, no, not me. And as we know from later on in the Easter story, Peter's not that fast, so he probably is like getting outrun by John. It's like, no, I'm going to get sick first. So they all just scatter, and it's like they dive in the bushes, they dive behind trees, and they all like slowly peek out and look. This isn't in the text, this is just in my mind when I see. And they slowly look around for the tree and to see where Jesus ran off to. And Jesus didn't run. And they're like, wait a minute, no! Like, that's our point. Like, run, Jesus! Just thinking like, what are you doing? And Jesus stands here on the trail. And this man approaches him, has this conversation with him, and Jesus touches the man. Jesus reaches out into contamination, into sin. He reaches out into sickness and puts his hand on that man. And that man had not felt physical touch in years. The second he contracted his disease, nobody touched him ever again. And Jesus, full well, could have been like, oh, dude, you're healed like from a distance. He could have just yelled it, like, don't even come over here. Like, you're fine. But he lets the man get all the way up to him. The man says, I believe that you could do it. Jesus goes, I can do it. And he puts his hand on that leper, and the leprosy immediately leaves. Now, the Jews, who were Jesus' disciples, watching from afar, see this, and they would have been very intrigued by this. Because being good Jews and good students of the Torah and good students of the Tanakh and knowing their scriptures in and out, they would have known only one person can make leprosy go away. And that's God himself. That has to be an act of God. So that would have been, they would have looked at him and been like, Moses never made leprosy go away. Noah never made leprosy go away. Abraham never made leprosy go away. They're like, this has to be somebody who is right next door to God, if not God himself, because no one has ever made this sickness go away. And Jesus said, I will it, be healed. Places his hand on him, and the man goes away healed. And so we see in this combination that, yes, Jesus heals the physical infirmity, but first things first, he deals with the ultimate problem. In healing this man, the first thing that had to happen before he was physically healed is that the sin must be removed. And when Jesus said, I will it, and he touched him, the sin goes away, the healing follows after. It's a powerful element that Jesus did not have to touch that man and reached out and did that anyway. I love that so much. So let's go on to verse 17, because what I love about verse 17, this is where I want us to spend the majority of our time, because I love this story so, so much. And if you've been in church any time, you've probably heard this before, but if not, lock in, because it's fantastic. But in verse 17, on one of those days, as he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there, who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was with him to heal. And behold, some men were bringing on a bed a man who was paralyzed. And they were seeking to bring him in and lay him before Jesus, but finding no other way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof. And they let him down with his bed through the tiles in the midst before Jesus. And when he saw their faith, he said, man, your sins are forgiven. And the scribes and the Pharisees began to question, saying, well, who is this man that can speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? And when Jesus perceived their thoughts, he answered them, why do you question in your hearts? What is easier to say, that your sins are forgiven, or to rise and walk? But so that you will know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the man who was paralyzed, I say to you, rise, pick up, take your bed, and go home. Immediately the man rose before them, picked up what he had been laying on, and went home, glorifying God. And the amazement seized them all, and they glorified God, and were filled with awe, saying, we have seen extraordinary things today. So this passage is fantastic, but there's a couple things I want to get out of the way first. When we hear the word Pharisee, that's a churchy word. Maybe if you've been to church before, you've heard somebody say Pharisee, you've heard somebody talk about that before. But a Pharisee was a part of a group of people at this time. And a Pharisee was somebody who didn't technically work for the church. They were like a lay person. They were like a volunteer. When I think of Pharisees, I think of like the neighborhood watch. Like, you're not a police officer, you're just pretending. And that's what these guys did. They kind of walked around, and they would go from town to town, and they would be enforcers. Sometimes they were bullies about it. But what they were doing was that they were trying to make sure that Israel stayed on track. But what I love about this passage actually launches into the first of four controversies. The first of four elements where Jesus gets into beef with this group of people, and it gets messy. And so this group of people, the Pharisees, like I said, they're kind of like the bulldogs, the watchdogs. They go around making sure that people are following the law, make sure that the Jews stay Jewish. They're like kind of belligerent about that. And then there was another group of people called the scribes, and these guys actually worked for the temple. Their job was to copy down the Torah, make copies of it, and they were kind of walking around as like walking dictionaries. People could ask a scribe, well, hey, well, like, what does the book of Joshua say about this? And then that person would be able to recite it. And like a scribe was also a very powerful person. And then the third group, which they're not in this story, are the Sadducees. And the Sadducees are the easiest to remember because the Sadducees believed in the Torah, but they did not believe in everlasting life. They didn't believe that when you died, you went somewhere else. They just thought they were just naturalists when it came to the Old Testament. And they said, when you die, you die. You just turn into dust. That's all it is. And so because of that, it's easy to remember them because the Sadducees don't believe in eternal life, and that would make you sad, you see. There you go. You're welcome. You're like, call your parents, Mom, you're going to love this joke. It's so good. But the group of people who just didn't believe in that. So in this story, we have the Pharisees and the scribes. They've caught wind of Jesus. They've caught wind and seen that this man is popular. He's teaching things. And the Pharisees' job is to make sure that everything is in line. They want to make sure things are kosher. Now, you got to remember, at this time, that Israel is under Roman occupation. And the Romans have a literal pantheon of gods. They have gods upon gods upon gods. Everything is a god. Back in ancient Rome, you just look around and there were statues just everywhere to 1 million gods. In fact, in the book of Acts, later on, there's a time where Romans even would put a statue to the God of the Bible, but they didn't know what to call him, so they called him the unknown God. And Peter preaches this really powerful sermon at the foot of that statue, and a really powerful scene. But the Roman influence was huge. The Hellenistic approach of their gods was encroaching. And if you've ever read the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, you know full well that the Jews struggled with staying faithful to the Lord. Time after time, another religion would come in or be next door, and they'd say, okay, we take that. And then God would say, no, I'll send a prophet or a judge to restore you, to bring you back. And then they would be redeemed, and then they would find somebody else, and they would chase after that, and they would chase after that. And the Old Testament is the story, ultimately, of a father chasing his kids and just never giving up on his kids and just running them down. Like, hey, stay in the house, and the kid runs outside the house, and God goes and gets them. And then repeat that for 50 books. There's the Old Testament. These guys took it as their personal mission. A Pharisee took it as their personal mission to be a defender against that. Now, so these guys had good intentions. I think we read Pharisee, we hear Pharisee, we automatically think, that's a bad guy. Like, if we're going to keep the Batman theme going from kids' church, that's the Joker. Like, we always just think of the Pharisees as the bad guys. But the Pharisees had good intentions at their core because what they wanted was to keep the Jewish people faithful to Yahweh. They didn't want to see their people forsaken. They didn't want to see their people destroyed. They didn't want to see exile or enslavement happen again. And so these guys were like, we're going to go around basically forcing people to follow God so that we don't get punished. And so these guys see of this new rabbi, this popular guy who's going around town, and he's healing people and he's redeeming people, and he's teaching these things that they've never heard somebody teach with authority. And they go, well, we have to make sure, we have to verify, we have to check his facts, and we have to make sure he's teaching, and he gets the stamp of approval. And so they go to investigate. And so one day, Jesus is at this house. The Pharisees are there. Crowds are everywhere. And everybody has packed out this house. And you got to think, as the owner of this house, this is got to be like the coolest thing ever. Because not only do you have the Pharisees and the scribes, kind of like these elite level, like the super faithful people. Then the house is packed full of people. And then you have Jesus, the new, hot, up-and-coming rabbi who's just going around sweeping the nation. Like, you got your celebrity. It would be like back in the day if Billy Graham was like, hey, I'm going to hold a revival in your house. That would have been a bad idea. But basically, this house is just swamped. It's packed full of people. So this group of friends catches wind. In verse 18, it says, behold, some men were bringing on a bed a man who was paralyzed. And they were seeking to bring him in and lay him before Jesus. So these group of guys catch wind that Jesus is nearby. And because of what they have heard or what they had seen by this point, these were all local boys, and Jesus had been in this one region for a while. They may have already seen Jesus do a miracle and rescue somebody. They believe fully Jesus can heal. Like, I know Jesus can heal. Because if you've ever, I don't think anybody here has ever put somebody like in a sleep bag and tried to carry it, but people are heavy, all right? So these guys put their friend on a mat and picked it up and carried him miles. You don't do that on a whim. You don't do that on a hope. You don't say, well, dude, like, we're going to lay on the bed, we're going to carry you like 4 miles away, like, and we just really hope that this guy can help you. These guys threw their dude on the mat and said, get in, we're going. Like, this guy is going to fix this. This guy is going to heal you. I saw him do it. I saw him heal this guy in Capernaum. I saw him heal this guy in Nazareth. I saw it. Get in, we're going. Like, get in, we're going shopping. And he like throws the kid on the mattress. And they pick him up and they carry him, and then they get there, and of course, it's a madhouse. The house is packed full of people. There's nowhere to go. There's no standing room. This small house, and when we think of a house, the houses back then, for the most part, the walls, you probably don't care about this, but I do as a nerd, but what did houses look like 2,000 years ago? It would have been a mixture of like a stucco brick for your walls, very easy to build and very easy to post up. And then what you have done is you would have taken wooden beams because you didn't have a lot of wood. This was the desert. So they would have taken whatever wood they could have found and made a few cross beams across the top, and then they would have laid branches and reeds, and then they would have packed mud on top to form a roof. Now, this was great because it was great against the elements. They would have a flat roof so that when it was hot in the summer, they could go up on the roof and sleep on the roof at night to keep them cool. That was kind of a nice element, a touch for having a flat roof at the time. And then if they ever needed to repair it, it was very simple to repair. You just made more mud. So these guys see this roof, they see this house, and they go, we can't get in. We got to figure this out. And the house would have had a stairway on the outside of the house leading up to the roof. And you just got to think, which one of those friends was like, I got an idea. Follow me. And I just wonder, in my mind, I'm like, did the guy on the mat protest this? He said, where are we going, guys? What are you doing? And he started going up the first set of stairs. He's going up the thing, and he's just like imagine he drops him, he slides down the stairs, and they have to go down there and pick him back up, and they go back up again. It's like the guy's probably like, please, like, just take me home. This is not worth it. Like, don't do this. And they get up on the roof, and then I'm sure the paralyzed man was like, all right, great idea, dummies. Now what happens? And one guy's like, watch this. And he punches a hole through the roof. He breaks the roof. They would have been tiles because there would have been cross beams of wood across, and so they would have been the square. And so this one guy's like, dude, I'm getting my friend to Jesus. Like, that guy in this house will heal my friend. Like, my friend has never been able to walk. He was born paralyzed. He's never stood up. He's never walked. He's never known what that's like. He goes, I will get him to Jesus, even if it costs me property damage. And he kicks in the roof. The friends all get on board. They kick in the roof. And this is verse 19. Finding no way, they lower him down into the room in front of Jesus. And I just love this scene because you got to imagine that it's like just shoulder to shoulder. There's nobody is like, it's just packed out. And then all of a sudden you're in this room and a foot comes through the ceiling. Like, just, you look up and he's just a little kicking, and then it comes back up, and then again and again and again until the hole is open. And then you see a man being lowered in from above. I always think of, like, I don't know if this state's like where I'm from, but I think like WCW, like being lowered in from like the rafters, like just slowly lowering you down. And as the homeowner, you must have been like, hey, what are we doing? Like, everybody's like, wow, look at this man, look at these guys' faith, look at this, they're lowering this guy, this is the best thing. Oh my gosh, people are doing anything to get to Jesus. And the homeowner's like, my roof. Thankfully, because of the way they built these roofs and these houses, it would have been an easy repair. So that's why we don't ever have any mention of the guy being like, hey, you owe me like 14 shekels. It's like, he's just like, it's like not even mentioned. But he breaks in the roof, he lowers the friend down, and it lands down. And this man, you must have thought that paralyzed man must have been the most awkward, like 30-second descent of his life. Because it's not like he was just lowered in front of Jesus and it was just that. It was like lowered in front of Jesus and like 50, 100, packed. We don't know how many people, but the room, all these people are staring at you and you're just laying down like, hey, what's up? Yeah, I'm going to see Jesus. Yeah, excuse me. And it just goes all the way down into the lap of Jesus. And Jesus looks at this and he goes, and he says the wildest thing. Verse 20. When he saw their faith, when he saw the faith of the friends, he said, man, your sins are forgiven. And I just had to imagine that one of those friends on the roof was like, that's not what we're here for. Like, do the other thing. Like, he said, hey man, your sins are forgiven. And of course, the Pharisees and the scribes hear this, and immediately rage because they know only one person from Hebrew law is allowed to forgive sins. Only one person, and that is God himself. Now, the forgiveness of sins is an interesting concept because every sin that you and I have ever committed against a person, a sin against ourselves, or whatever, is a sin that is against somebody, but it is ultimately, every sin you and I have ever done has always been against God. God has a standard. God's standard is innocence. And so every sin I've ever committed has been a crime against God. And God, as the one who had the crime done to him, is the only one who can forgive me of that crime. If I break the law, or if I steal something from somebody's house, like their neighbor doesn't forgive me. It has to be the person's house I broke into. And so God ultimately has full authority to forgive sins. But when they hear this, they're indignant. They call it a blasphemy. They say, this is a blasphemy worthy of death. We should kill you right here on the spot for this. Like, that was, okay, cool. Like you said, he's forgiven. There's a hole in the roof, and this is really strange, but we're going to drag you outside and execute you for this. Like, you've committed a blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And the Pharisees were right in saying that. Like, that was a correct statement. And they said, no one's able to forgive sins except for God. And Jesus is kind of like, okay, well, plot twist. So when Jesus perceived their thoughts, like, so they're whispering, they're talking to themselves, they're thinking to themselves, and Jesus in his Godhood can obviously tell what they're thinking. And he answers them. He says, hey, why are you saying this in your head? Why are you upset about this? Yes, only God can forgive, because up to this point, the system that the Hebrews were using for the forgiveness of sins was a sacrificial replacement atonement system. That's what the Old Testament laid out. That was the idea that when you committed a sin, you had to bring forth a spotless, perfect animal to whatever your prorated income was. If you were rich, you brought a lamb. All the way down, they had different metrics. And if you were broke, you brought in a bird. But you brought in an animal, and the priest would take that animal, sacrifice that animal on the altar, and that animal's death, this sounds barbaric 2,000 from our stance, but this animal's death was the idea that this animal's innocence will take your place. Because throughout the New Testament, the relationship that we see between us and God is a courtroom drama. Like, you and I are guilty of committing crimes, and God, as the judge, sits in judgment, and he says, I'm a good judge. I'm a perfect judge, I'm a holy judge, but as a good judge, I will allow somebody to take your place. You are guilty of the crimes, you are going to face punishment, you are guilty of sin, literally. But somebody can take your place because I love you so much. And in the Old Testament, that system of what that looked like was the animal, the sacrificial lamb. That's where we get that phrase from, the sacrificial lamb. And he said, okay, you can bring forth an animal. And up until this point, that was all the Jews had ever known for what could take away sin. Like, that was the only thing that worked. And Jesus said, no. I will be the last sacrificial lamb. That when Jesus died on that cross, we just celebrated Easter last week, that when Jesus laid down his life on that cross, what he was doing was saying, in the court of God's love, I will lay down my life once and for all. No more animals. Those are just shadows of what's to come. The real thing is here. When Jesus laid down his life on that cross, what he did was established that there would be no other sacrifices beside him. Because if an innocent person wanted to take my place as a guilty person, it's only a one-for-one transaction, a life for a life. Only one person could take my place. If I lived an innocent, perfect life, and I wanted to lay down my life for my neighbor who lived a sinful life, it's only a one-for-one. But if God himself, as Jesus, said, I'll lay down my life, well, how many lives is the life of God worth? The life of every human who's ever lived. All. Hence why John 3:16, God so loved the world that he laid down his life so that the option is open to all people, because the life of Jesus is worth that of all people, because he was God in a body. And so the Pharisees are upset, of course, and to a certain degree, rightly so, because they don't understand. They're used to, the problem here in this situation is they were gatekeeping. In their idea, in their mind, they wanted to be in charge of the system. They had the front row access. They had the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And so they're the ones who were allowed to say, no, you can't come to the Lord. You can't come to the Lord. You got to do this right. You got to do that right. They were the ones who had all the power. So, of course, they were like, no, we don't want a new system. We like this system. We're in power. So I don't want to give that up. I don't want to let go of that. And that's that idea that I think a lot of us struggle with today, is that I want God to move, but he has to move in the way that I want him to move in. And if he doesn't look and he doesn't do exactly how I think God should work, well, then I've got beef with God. As if we can just tell God how he should behave and how he should treat us. But in our minds, we go, no, it's like, God, you wouldn't do that. I think. But then we get upset at God. And we that's the question we need to ask ourselves on a regular basis. Am I seeing God for who he is or how I want him to be? And the Pharisees and the scribes, they had an idea. God has to do this and this and this, and he can never do anything else. And Jesus said, God can do anything and everything. Now, here's my favorite part of the story, is that Jesus says, he goes, which one's harder? He goes, which one was harder for me to do? Like, would it have been harder for me to heal this man physically or harder for me to heal him spiritually? And, of course, the Pharisees have no answer to this. And he goes, but so that you know, this is verse 24, so that you would know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He looks at this guy on the mat and says, get up and walk. And immediately the man is healed. Immediately he stands up. This is so powerful because Jesus doesn't just heal this man, he restores this man. Because if you know anything about medicine or, the human body anatomy, that if this man had never walked before in his entire life, his muscles would have had like lifelong atrophy. They would have never worked. He would have never known. He would have never had the ability to stand. This is more than just like your legs asleep. You know what I'm saying? Like he would have never had the muscle power to stand up. And when Jesus said, get up and walk, this man, without ever standing up, fully restored, stands up and walks out. And you got to think that one friend who was on the roof was like, I told you. Like, I told you. Because the friends on the roof had the faith. They knew who God was, and they believed. Because they knew that they had seen Jesus do it before, they knew they could trust him to do it again. And because of their faith, trusting God when it doesn't make sense, their friend was healed spiritually, and their friend was healed physically. Now, this is the thing, that our ultimate sickness, the biggest number one problem in our lives, in the life of every single person who's ever lived, is that we are born spiritually sick. Spiritually broken. The condition that I am between God and me is broken. Not because of him. God designed a system so that we would be united with him, that we'd be with him, but he said, because I love you and I want you to experience love, I will give you free will. You will have the choice. I will not force you to follow me. I will not force you to love me. God said, I'm not creating a bunch of robots who just smile and wave. That's not what I want. You have the option. Because we have that option, we chose to walk away. Genesis, on the first page, Genesis chapter 2, we walked away. We said, I don't trust you, God. And Jesus, as the act of God, the act of perfect love, said, no. I will restore. I will heal the brokenness that's between you and your Creator. That rescue is why Jesus showed up. That's why he showed up, was to make sure that we could be reunited. And he says the physical healing that Jesus did was so that he could say, listen, I want you guys to see full well that I have authority over the earth. I have full authority over all power. I have full authority in every single thing. And even if I never healed somebody, me dying on the cross would be all you ever needed. And this is such a powerful thing because this is where it gets into the social ministry side of things. Like as a church, we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our community. Always, 100%. If there's a need in this town, if there's a need in the town next door, Avenue Church is a church that will do something about it. Like, the lunch program runs out and need them, well, we're there. Somehow we would figure that out. Like, if something went wrong in this town needed something done physically, Avenue Church is the kind of church that with an open hand will say, we're going to step into that gap, and we're going to make sure that need gets met. As an act of following God and following Jesus in that way. Now, the ultimate goal is to make sure that people know and feel the love of Jesus to be restored back to the King. What I love for this is that when I read this passage, the question that sticks out of my heart, that I want to stick out in our hearts as a church is, what roofs do I need to kick in? I need to break some tiles. Like, Jesus laid down his life for me. And he rescued me. And he didn't rescue me for a life of just like solo Christian living, for me to do my little thing, to go to church when I want to and just have my own little thing. And sometimes I sprinkle some Jesus in there. No. He laid his life on that cross so that I could be restored to the King. And as somebody who's been restored to the King, I am then on mission to do the same. Like, the people in my life are the people that God has divinely appointed to be in my life so that I could love them and serve them and show them what it looks like to be like Jesus. Like, I have a divine mandate, a commission from the Lord to live my life for the good of others, to get them to Jesus. Like, I'm not supposed to just be okay with the fact that my teammates don't follow Jesus. I'm not supposed to be okay with the fact that my neighbors don't follow Jesus. I'm not supposed to go to bed at night and be totally at peace with the fact that I got a family member who doesn't follow Jesus. It should gnaw at us a little bit. And this isn't a guilt thing. This isn't like, oh, I feel so bad. Like, I got on an airplane and I didn't share the gospel with the person next to me. I'm bad. No. There's no guilt in that. There's no shame in sharing the gospel. What it is I have seen the healing of the Lord. I've been healed. My soul has been restored. My heart has been made new. And so because of that, I want to get as many people to that healing as possible. Like, I'm not doing this out of guilt. Like, I got to make converts. No. We reject that. I'm not making converts. I'm getting people to the doctor. I'm getting people to the rescuer. I'm getting people to the Lord. And so where am I at in my life? My workplace, my home, the ball field, whatever you want to call it, wherever I am, in that place, I should be thinking, how do I get this person to Jesus? It's a gospel urgency. That if I know that Jesus can heal, and I know that Jesus can forgive because he forgave me, well, that means I'm going to do the same for my friends. I'm going to break down those walls. And maybe it doesn't necessarily look like you breaking in somebody's roof. I think that's kind of awkward. This is a great door here. Don't kick in the roof to bring somebody to Avenue. But sometimes it's as simple as inviting somebody to church. That's really basic, and that seems kind of like a very Sunday school answer. But you'd be surprised by the number of people that if you just said, hey, would you want to come to church with me on Sunday? We've got bagels and great coffee. They go, I could give that a shot. It's a low ask. You're not asking them, hey, listen, what happens if you die? Like, calm down. Like, dude, do you want cream cheese or what? Like, just lay off. That's the first step. And what I love, because I was a youth pastor for 20 years, and I loved being a youth pastor. One of my favorite things as a youth pastor was to get students to stop idolizing their hobbies, to stop idolizing sports, to stop idolizing the arts, to stop idolizing things, and instead use those things and those places as a place to serve and to love and to lead people to Jesus. Like, God gifted you with the gift of playing volleyball, fantastic. Stop worshiping it, lead your team to Jesus. God gifted you with the gift of playing basketball, must have been nice, all right? A little hurt there. The same size as this podium. So yes, there's a little bit of pain there. If he gifted you in playing basketball, good. Lead your team to Jesus. If he made you an artist, he made you a thespian, and lead your theater group to Jesus. You have more influence with that group of people than I would ever have. You have more authority with those people than I would ever have. A group of theater kids aren't going to listen to Bert. I'm not a theater kid. I was in a play once, but we're not going to talk about that. But I don't have that relational credibility. You do. So what are the things that God has uniquely gifted you with in your life that would give you the relational credibility to be able to have a spiritual conversation with somebody? I hate the fact that as a society, there's two things we don't talk about, politics and religion. Joke's on you. Those are the two things I feel like we talk about the most. We really do. We feel very confident to talk about politics and religion. And people don't mind talking about religion with people they care about. So there's somebody in your life that loves you. And because they love you, they'd be willing to hear what you think about Jesus. Let's break some roofs. Let's kick some tiles in as a church. Not just so that we can fill up a room of people on a Sunday morning, but so that we can expand the size of the kingdom of heaven. Oh my gosh. You and I all have the ability to increase the physical size of heaven. That's the goal. That's the mission. And so in Luke chapter 5, that's what we end up with, is this idea that my sins are forgiven in Christ and restored, and where do I need to bring that to next? As somebody who's received, where do I take it to next? It starts off with an easy invitation, and it can be something as where my relational credibility kicks in. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just want to say thank you so much for your word, for the fact that you have revealed yourself to us in the Scriptures, Father. Thank you.